First story on the list. Overwatch is finally getting role queue. This is from Imran Khan over at Game Informer. And the article reads, after years of requests, Blizzard has implemented role queuing into Overwatch. This lets players choose a role like support, tank, damage, and go into matches specifically for characters in that role. Blizzard's Jeff Kaplan explained the reasoning in this new developer update. Certain roles are more needed at different times than others, so there are in-game rewards in the form of loot boxes for players that queue up for their roles. In theory, this should help include the competitive balance. For the game, limiting players to what is best for the team rather than whatever hero might help at the moment. Every team will be comprised of 2 damage, 2 tank, and 2 support. This is the new matchmaking system for competitive and quick play. Players cannot opt out. You choose your role at the beginning and you stick to that role in the match. The only option for players who want to play the old way will be an arcade mode called Quick Play Classic. So you guys can watch the entire developer update. We're not going to do that here because I think that we've already touched on the main things, the big things that are coming in this update now. We've known that this was coming, 222 lock was coming to the Overwatch League. And then earlier this week, they shortened the season from 49 days remaining to 27 days remaining. And people started to speculate that, they're going to try to launch role queue at a similar time as we start to see this in stage 4 of the Overwatch League, and that's why they've shortened the season, that there was going to be some like monumental change that was coming, and they were absolutely right. So role queue is going live today in the PTR. You can play it right now if you have the PTR. I was going to do that tonight actually on stream, go try the role queue, but I apparently deleted the PTR at some point and would have to reinstall the entire thing if I was wanting to try it out on stream. But it's going to go live for everybody else after testing on September 1st. And then from what I think I saw elsewhere, they're actually going to run kind of an abbreviated competitive season for September 1st for a couple weeks to make sure that, the role queue is working. And so you're also going to have a skill rating tied to each role. So you can see it in the screenshot provided in the Game Informer. In the Game Informer article here. You have a separate SR for tank, separate SR for damage, and a separate one for support as well. So there's some angles to talk about this from. Again, this has been a much speculated change coming to Overwatch, and there's been a lot of conversation in the Overwatch community about what this may mean for the future of the game. As you can tell from my Overwatch League hat, huge Overwatch fan. I've got, 4-digit hours in the game, have been playing since beta. I have seen this game go through tremendous changes. And look, Blizzard is not a company that's afraid to make changes to this game if they think it's going to be best for the game. So if you don't remember, originally, there were actually no hero limits in competitive play. You could play, 6 McCrees if you wanted to, because and then they introduced 1 character hero limits into competitive play. Now, I think this is kind of a monumental shift from the original vision for Overwatch, but the original vision for Overwatch was, I think, kind of murky. Not murky, but but Blizzard kind of moved away from their original vision from it before the game even launched. So originally, yes, it was supposed to be a no hero limit 6v6 objective based competitive shooter. But one of the other big things was that competitive play was going to be limited to only teams of 6 people. So in the entire lead up to the release of the game, it had been designed with this idea in mind that players are only going to play this game competitively if they have a group of 5 people that they can play it with. So think like, the raids in Destiny. Like you may be able to find random people to play with, but the game does not facilitate that for you, right? There would be no matchmaking for that. You would have to go outside of the game to find your group of 6 to play the game competitively. The game was also designed so that you could switch heroes at any time, and you could switch across any class at any time as well. So we can start the game with, 4 damage dealers, a tank, and a healer, and then we can switch to 3 healers and 3 tanks and no damage within the middle of the game. So this marks a monumental shift from the vision of what Overwatch was intended to be. When they designed this game, they said we wanted the freedom for players to go in and to strategize and adapt their gameplay based on what the other team is running. But as all competitive games go, and as the professional scene has grown as well, there's always going to be a combination of 6 characters that is the strongest. That's how it's been in any competitive game that has heroes ever, right? And when your game is designed in such a way that there is going to be one dominant combination of characters, regardless of players' abilities to switch between, they are always going in the highest levels, right? When we're talking pro play, they're always going to lean towards a mirror composition because it gives them the best chance to win. They know that this combination of heroes is the most powerful. People have a lot of problems with goats, right? And hold on, my wife has texted me now 3 times. Oh. Sorry, she's texting me about our dog who is eating out of the, she fed her in her bowl, and once she finished, she walked over to her food container, nudged the lid up with her nose, and then ate out of it. All right, let's talk about goats for a second. Goats is not the most entertaining composition to watch for a lot of people, right? And I've said this before on the podcast, and sorry, we're going to get a little in the weeds with competitive Overwatch and professional Overwatch, right? Dive received a lot of we've seen it across the board with Overwatch, that anytime there's a dominant meta, people bitch about the dominant meta and say that it's ruining the game. Right? Dive is ruining the game. Bunker is ruining the game. Double sniper is ruining the game. Goats is ruining the game. But Goats was a different animal, right? Number one, Goats does not highlight individual play very well when you're watching it competitively, and that's I think where a lot of this conversation stemmed from. This season of Overwatch, of the Overwatch League, has not been as entertaining as last year's, in my opinion, and I think it's because it's been a lot harder to follow storylines of individual players because their individual play has not been quite as highlighted as it was in Dive, when there were dominant Tracers, dominant Genjis, really great Winstons, and then obviously like Jonak, Zenyatta, things like that. The problem with Goats, though, yes, it's not that entertaining to watch, but also it's completely dominated the game for now almost an entire year. Well, at this point, over a year. And Blizzard has not been able to crack the code of how to patch, how to balance out Goats, right? Because there's massive amounts of AoE healing in the game. The tanks have massive health pools that are getting recharged very, very quick, regenerated very, very quickly. Ultimates are recharging at an enormous rate, which is something else that's happening in this update. Slower rate of recharge on slower rate of recharge on ultimates. And regardless of the little tweaks and changes that they made to each individual character, they couldn't quite seem to stamp out at least the skeleton of Goats, right? We've seen some variations. We've seen Winston Goats. We've seen what people started calling like May Goats and Sombra Goats and those sorts of things. But it was always just like these 3 healers and then 2 tanks and a DPS, or 3 healers, 3 tanks. And the meme of it, and we talked about this with like GameStop, right? That like the meme of the trade-in values got away from GameStop, and they can never quite recover from that. And I think we were reaching a similar point with Overwatch. There were people in, I play in gold, right? There were people in gold bitching about Goats, and it's like, motherfucker, we don't play Goats. We're lucky if we get a single healer on this team, let alone 3. People are like, oh man, Goats is killing this game, man. Goats is just killing it. And I'm like, look, man, Winston, Reinhardt, Roadhog, and then whatever 3 healers is not Goats. Like, just because it's a 3-3 composition does not make it go, oh man, Goats is just fucking killing this game, man. And the meme just started to get away from it, right? I played Overwatch for a long time. I never heard people in gold say, oh man, Dive is just killing this game, man. Oh, Double Sniper's just killing this game. It was always like, oh, Sim is trash, Torbjorn, Bastion, they're trash. Like, the narrative between high elo and professional Overwatch never matched the narrative that was going on in lower elos, but Goats dominated for some reason. And I think it's because, you know, the more and more popular the pros got and the more familiar we got with the terminology around it, the more comfortable we got complaining about it, right? Whereas, like, before Overwatch League, obviously there was still competitive Overwatch, but it wasn't as, like, mainstream within the Overwatch community. And so we didn't really have the vocabulary to bitch about it. And Goats was really the first thing we were able to really cling on to. But I also think that this had to be done in competitive play to maintain the integrity of the experience, right? Playing competitive is awful in Overwatch. It's awful. They've designed this very team-based game that requires a very specific approach, right? There's a lot of freedom within the approach, but the skeleton of the approach is very, very particular, right? There are certain there's a certain environment that has to be set up in order for you to be successful. And yeah, you may jump into a game where you got 5 DPS and you're playing healer, and you may be able to, you know, clutch out a victory or something, but it's not the way the game was designed. And so you had all these games where it was either you weren't playing some sort of ideal composition, or you weren't playing with the ideal number of healers in a game because people just weren't willing to switch, or you jump into a game with a guy who has 300 hours on DPS characters that's like, I guess I'll flex to play main tank, and he like has 5 hours in total across his account on main tank. What role queue is going to allow you to do in competitive play is pick what it is that you want to play and be guaranteed that role when you step into the game. And I welcome that, right? I always worry when I jump into a game. I'm mainly tank, right? I play a little bit of healer. I play almost no DPS. I always worry when I get into a game that, like, oh man, we're going to get 2 tanks immediately and I'm going to be stuck having to heal. Like, and that's just not what I'm best at. And I don't feel like I'm putting my team at in the optimal position to win if I'm being forced to play healer. And so, there's going to be a lot less, like, I think, immediate tilt coming out of people when they jump in and like, oh man, oh, you motherfuckers ought to insta-lock DPS, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh man, Widow Hanzo, as soon as you queue in. And I've been that toxic person. That's why I'm fully aware of it. And so I think that is going to get eliminated to a certain extent. And so, yeah, I think this really does save competitive play in a lot of ways, and I think it's going to draw people back in. There are some downsides to it, right, that I think are going to rear their head. The first is the most obvious one and the biggest critique of role queue, and that is queue times, right? So, and keep in mind, this is a screenshot taken from the PTR. A lot fewer players that are playing, but as you can see, it's like for tank, underneath it, it says your queue time will be less than 10 minutes. For damage, it's going to be over 10 minutes. And for support, it's going to be less than 5 minutes. And the game is aware that there's not as many support people that are queuing into the game. And so, you know, they reward you with these loot boxes. As much as I bitch about, you know, playing with terrible compositions and people insta-locking DPS. At the end of the day, these people spent money on the game and they should be able to play the heroes that they want to play. And while I think this ultimately allows them to do that, it does disincentivize people to play damage heroes because of the long queue times. And basically you're telling those people, like, either suck it up and wait 10 minutes or switch your roles. And say what you will about that mindset, but I play with guys who play DPS and they're willing to flex and they're willing to switch, but at the end of the day, they enjoy the game the most when they're able to play damage heroes. And it would just be, I don't know. I think it would be detrimental for those individuals to have to experience these long queue times. And again, once this is live and everybody is queuing into these roles, I think we're going to see these go down significantly. But still, if damage is going to have to wait over 10 minutes just to be able to find a game, I'm not sure those people would say, well, I'm just going to learn how to play tank or play healer. And they won't just say, well, I'm just going to go play another game, right? Where I don't have to wait around for 10 minutes and I can play the game the way that I want to play it. I'm also not a huge fan of tying loot boxes onto a role for a similar reason, right? Because you're going to get a lot of damage people who just don't want to wait 10 minutes and are like, well, I've never really played support, but I guess I'll play support. And if you start incentivizing different roles, you're going to start to get people queuing in for those roles who don't have experience within it, and are just doing it for the loot box. And you're going to get what I get in League a lot of the times where people are just, grinding out XP and they're like, well, I'll join this bot match where people are trying to learn and just stand under tower and move when I'm about to get kicked because I don't really want to put in the effort. Oh, I'll just pick a support hero to go play in competitive mode and, feed my ass off and throw just because I need to get that loot box. Although I assume that earned loot box is probably tied to winning within those roles as well. But another positive effect of this, though, is I think that it's going to ultimately help with some of the smurfing that goes on. Because a lot of Smurf accounts are created so that you can practice on different roles. Having SR tied to each individual role, a main tank who is a diamond player who's like, man, I don't really have much experience on damage. I can go play damage and it's not going to impact my SR on the tank. That's Graffiti in the chat says Smurf. So a Smurf account is when somebody creates an alternate account to be able to either practice a role that they're uncomfortable or unfamiliar with, or sometimes people use Smurf accounts to get on, intentionally throw games, and then just be able to like meme on people in much lower elos and like just look dominant. I played with people who are like, man, this is my Smurf account. I just play on this so that I can make YouTube highlight compilations of me getting headshots with Widow. He developed an accent in the middle of telling me all about it, so. Yeah, I think it's going to eliminate at least the former of those two to an extent, right? Because you're still going to get people who are like, oh man, well, I'm really, really great at hit scan damage dealers, and I want to start playing more projectile damage, but I don't want to impact my damage dealer SR, so I'm going to create a Smurf account. That's Graffiti says, is it always a bad thing? It's not always a bad thing if it's used properly, I think. Like, we created an alternate account on Overwatch just because we wanted to see where we would rank without our historical, SR before us. And if you're using it really just to learn roles, then I think it's a good thing. But if you're going into games and you're like, well, I'm a diamond tank, I placed in gold to learn damage, how to play damage. My team's losing, so I'm just gonna go switch to main tank and hard carry out. Like, that's a bad thing. But if you're just using your account to learn those roles, I don't think that's a bad thing. And people may disagree with me, but yeah, I think smurfing is gonna be less and less of a thing with this structure, or not less and less. I don't know if it's gonna significantly impact it, but I do think that we're gonna see less smurfs because you're going to be able to just hop over and play on the SR for, and impact the SR for the role that you're training for rather than the one that you. And then the other angle for this, obviously, is the Overwatch League and what it means for the Overwatch League. And a lot of people, I think, are rightly concerned about 222 in Pro Overwatch. And I somewhat agree. I'm going to ride the fence a little on this, and I think I can explain myself. With Overwatch's original intent of being able to play any combination of heroes at any given time and being able to switch, seeing players who play at the highest level able to develop compositions and perfect compositions has been really, really fun. And as much as we have kind of like bitched about how Goats is killing the game, we just had a team win the stage 3 championship with a 3-2-1 composition, right? With 3 damage dealers. 3 damage dealers, a tank, and 2 healers. Like, we've seen variety in compositions even throughout this entire season, which, people have memed on and saying that and said that it's, been dominated by goats or whatever. And when in reality, like, we've seen teams that don't run goats be successful. And Shanghai is just the latest example of that. Moving into a 2-2-2 roll lock means that we're going to see less and less creativity. There are just mathematically less opportunities to be creative with the kind of compositions that you can develop. Hands down. Like, that's just a mathematical fact. And so I don't like that they're making such a drastic change in the middle of a season, because I don't think that you would see that in any other game, really, right? Like, in League, we see teams, the game trying to play as close to the live patch as possible, right? And I think that's okay, because these are like tweaking this, tweaking that, balancing this, balancing that, fixing this bug, fixing that bug. But having a change like this would be like saying, okay, we're going to switch it up, guys. Every shot made from behind the 3-point line is actually now worth 5 points. Slam dunks are worth 3, and you just gotta kind of like figure out the game differently, like on the fly. And teams have known about this change since the beginning of June, apparently, and so it's given them time to prepare. But we saw this last year, even with the big meta shifts that happened, that like NYXL dominated the entire regular season, and then when Brigida got thrown into the mix, they kind of faded out in the playoffs. And so we've seen it in Overwatch League before, but I think this is going to even more drastically impact the landscape. And there are going to be certain teams that benefit from this more than others, and there are going to be teams that are on the top that are going to be worse off because of the 2-2-2 change. So in the short term, I wish they would have just said, hey, we're going to play out the rest of the season without the 2-2-2 lock and let teams just play it out as they've been training for all year. And then in the offseason, we're going to place in the 2-2-2 moving into the 2020 season. And moving forward, it makes sense, because you want the product that people are watching on screen to be similar to the product that they're playing at home, right? You want people to be able to connect and to relate. Your most hardcore fans are the people that come in and play this game every single day, or, a few times a week. And you want what they're seeing on screen when they're watching to be the same thing they're seeing on screen when they're playing. And also just from a talent evaluation standpoint, right? Like, it would be like, you don't see baseball teams going out to like beer league softball and recruiting their next like cleanup hitter, right? That's just not the way that it works. Those are two. They look very similar, but they're two different rule sets, and so you need that like through line to be able to assess people on. And so having a similar setup in your competitive as you do in your professional scene makes a lot of sense from just a talent assessment standpoint as well. But just imagine, like, there were tournaments that were played when there was no hero cap, right? Where you could just roll out like 3 McCrees. And if they'd have been like, well, that's a fundamental part of the way that we've built this competitive scene, and even though we're going to put a cap on for the experience here, we're going to keep it in the professional scene, like, the product we would have now would look entirely different. And so you have to evolve your esport alongside the product, and this was a necessary change in the competitive, just like amateur casual competitive audience. So I'm also curious to see what people think about this being the approach for quick play as well. And from what I understand, they're also switching it up. The game rules are going to be similar to competitive, so you'll play both offense and defense in your games as well. Like, that's not really quick play anymore. It's just unranked. Like, you're still going to get like 30-minute 2CP matches that just take forever because the game ends 6-5 or whatever. Like, but I also understand that, like, you want people who are new to the game to get as good a feel as they can for what the competitive experience is going to be like, and role queuing is exactly how they're going to to be able to get that experience. So overall, I think this is a good change. I think they should have rolled it out a little bit differently on the pro scene, but I'm interested. I'm going to download the PTR probably overnight and play on this tomorrow. Probably will stream myself playing on the PTR tomorrow, just so that you guys can get a feel for how this works, and we'll play across all 3 roles just to get a sense of what queue times are going to look like midday NA. So be on the lookout for that. Enough talk about Overwatch League, guys. I can talk about Overwatch all day. I love Overwatch. I got my Overwatch pop figures back here. My Moira, my Diva, my Pharah. I need an Ana. I need all the tanks because I play every tank except Ball. I'm a terrible hamster. Will feed my brains out on hamster more than I feed my brains out already. All right.